Well, good morning. Monday morning, that is, for everyone, at least on the east side of the state. It is raining over here, and I'm assuming it's probably raining on the west side of the state as well. Lynn, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I'm Pastor Brian Noble, CEO of Family Policy Institute of Washington, and we love to hear people's stories on this show. And so we're going to hear Lynn unpack her story of growing up in the communist regime. Lynn, why don't you just introduce yourself, give us a little bio, and so people know you, and then we're going to dive into your story today.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Um, well, my name is Lynn Trinh. I actually was born in China and grew up in the Cultural Revolution. My parents immigrated to this great country in the 80s, and then we eventually came as immigrants. And then I went through all my schooling here, and I worked as an architect. Now I have moved to Seattle for almost 20 some years now. And we have a family of 5 with 3 kids. And the reason I got connected with Brian earlier this year, or last year rather, because I ran a campaign for state legislature on the east side of Seattle. So I'm really eager to share my story. And I believe I had a very purposeful campaign. And I hope to share my story that led to that. Thank you again for having me on the show.
Oh, Lynn, thank you for coming on. And as always, if you'd like to ask a question or you have a comment, I'll be monitoring that. Now, I really want to stay focused on Lynn. So if I miss something or don't get to your question, don't be offended. But we would love to hear that. So Lynn, start wherever you would like. I'd love to hear a little bit about growing up in that communist regime, and just also about your campaign and all that's happening in your life.
All right, thank you. Let's see, I would start with actually our current years. The reason I got so involved with politics, which my parents told me never to get involved in, right? But
Right.
I feel there's a really strong urgency in this country. And since then, I've been sharing my story from my past, and also somewhat a current tour that I took in Tibet. And all these came together, helped me realize that unless I get involved and share my story and kind of share my past and help people to see forward and to save this great nation and the values and the tradition and the future of our kids. So I often come on the campaign, and when I start a conversation, I let people know that I was born in China. Actually, my house is like 1 block from the Forbidden City. So we were raised in the very core of a political and cultural center of China. So we get to see. In fact, my family witnessed the Great Tiananmen Massacre in 1989, and everything was right in front of them. But when we grew up, we only knew one thing, right? We didn't have anything to compare to. So for instance, when I was in school, we all saluted our party. Our party was the highest realm that anybody can hope for. Everything about from ranking to our academic standard, it's all to serve the party. And our parents at the time, everybody felt like our parents was just like somebody who supported us in terms of lifestyles. But really our emotions and our kind of thinking and direction of thought, it's all been very much controlled and actually at the time manipulated by the school and the teachers. So we really didn't know anything to compare to. And so, of course, when I see something similar, as I observe in the recent years here in the United States, I see something very similar that's happening right now, that the family get separated. The kids are depending more on the school and what they think the agenda is, the social ideology versus the trust that they had with the parents. So that's a number one thing that I think that's really evident to me, and I wanted to make people aware of that. And then, of course, the curriculum and what we learned in school was also something very distorted from the truth. So now I'm going back again to my childhood experience. Not until when I came to the United States, I started to realize the histories we learned, the traditions we learned, the fact that we are banned from religion, and all these things that we were taught in school were something to disengage us as a person, as a
Mhm.
family member, and as a true scholar, right? Someone who can
Right.
truly contribute to a virtual and a virtuous leadership for the country.
So
So
what I'm
I,
hearing,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. So I saw that I just heard you say something very unique, and that is in China, the educational system was stacked against the parents, is what I'm hearing you say, and that the main thought came from the educators. Is that what I just heard you say? I mean, is that accurate?
Absolutely right. But then the educator was influenced by the party. So they had a
Right.
very specific curriculum,
Oh wow.
and the really, how we are also losing the interactions
Mhm,
here between the parents and the teachers. In China, the only time the teacher ever reach out to the parents is
mhm.
when you're not compliant to listen to what they have to say in school. That's the only time they want parents to get involved, to discipline you, to make sure that you follow their agenda.
So there
I
was
mean,
this like unique connection between the party, the Communist Party, I'm assuming when you say that, and the educators, right? And they were
oh yeah,
educating from that curriculum. Wow.
absolutely. Yeah, they're all kind of I would say they're kind of a team together. I mean, they
Mm,
were probably also um, regulated to do that, right? So there was really no other ways of thinking. I
mhm,
often share a very interesting story. People really resonate with. It's that when I was in middle school, I we all have very structured curriculum and classes. So there's an art class where we all had to learn how to draw, and then the teacher usually do a demonstration, and then we supposed to
mhm.
follow exactly. So I'm always kind of artistic. I like to be creative. So after I done the tree drawing, just a tree on the field,
Mhm.
I looked around and everybody's still working on it. So I decided I was going to do a bird on it. I drew a bird singing on the tree branch. And then I was really optimistic because we really care about our grades, what kind of grade that we receive in the class.
Mhm.
So, I was really hoping for high praise. And then the next day, I realized I had failed that project because I did not follow the teacher exactly. And that had
Wow.
compromised my grade. And I was called up to my parents. My parents had to come to the principal's office and making sure, even though this seems to be a small thing at the time, they want to make sure this kind of thing will never happen again. So that
It's
was
because you
one of
draw
the,
you drew the bird. You
I
added a
drew an
bird?
extra bird. Hmm.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So things like that happens all the time. So as you
Right.
can see, then everybody is pretty much being uh, being they pretty much been structured a certain way, and
Mhm.
the way of thinking, the way of the relations with the teachers and with the parents is ever evolving, but everything is evolving towards your loyalty to the Communist Party, and they being the ultimate person and entity that you want to praise, to be
Wow.
loyal to. So
I
okay,
I I guess
so
I never really made that connection that the party was controlling the educators. That's so
mhm.
profound to me because we're seeing that foreshadowing, here where we have one party who's primarily controlling the educators to a certain degree on these, liberal issues or cultural issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Even as we are heading towards that direction, we still have so much more freedom here and
Mhm.
voices than in China. In China, it's pretty much shut down. Everything is censored. The
Mhm.
parents don't dare to challenge the teacher because their agenda is the ultimate most because
I
they
see.
represent the party.
Mhm.
And then if we joined any kind of ranking or association as youth, it's all because we want to salute to the party, we want to serve the party. So everything we do is to glorify the party
Wow.
itself. So they
Okay.
become our parent, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, go on with
Um,
your story. I keep interrupting you because I'm so
oh
pr I'm
no,
so
no.
I'm blown away by that fact. Like, it just hit me, like, I never thought about I mean, I thought about the, the indoctrination or the, falsely educating, kids in certain things, whether it be on gender or whatever. And I'm like, but I never tied it to the party, to a party.
Okay.
That's so unique, Lynn. Thank you for bringing that out.
Oh, absolutely. So if I could, what I'm going to do is, since I have this experience, and that is what's driven me to run the
Mhm,
campaign. So if I could, I'll just share my experience from the past, and see how I think that is becoming a
mhm,
signage
mhm,
in in its danger in this country. And so so that was the school side. So first we talked about dissembling the family and not trusting parents, and everything is driven in the school and their agenda, and limited. We're always limited in the way that we develop critical thinking. So the teacher will, first of all, our curriculum is all distorted, especially
mhm,
history and culture, and then. And then the core classes, everybody knows Chinese people, kids are usually pretty good at certain curriculums, but then they usually have nothing to do with history, and it's nothing to do with the history or the truth or the values in life.
mhm,
They're all, if you pay attention, you would notice that they were all very much achieved in something that's considered science or mathematics, but anything had to do with history or values, and just the virtues of life,
mhm,
we were never encouraged to think anything more than that.
mhm.
So when we were taught wrong history, and that's kind of the way that our mind was swayed by. For instance, when I grew up in the Cultural Revolution, this '70s, in the early
Mhm.
'70s, we experienced across the country a great famine. Everything is rationed because the Communist Party under Mao's leadership, um, they they took away the normal production, and so millions of people died in that period. But in Beijing, we're considered more privileged, but everything was put on a ration. We had these ration coupons, kind of like the food stamp here,
Right,
but
right.
applied more than food, right? So first we have very limited food. I would say we can eat meat once a year, usually during Chinese New Year, maybe the family can afford to get any meat. It's not because people are um, with less resources. It's just the whole country had no resources, and we
Right.
were rationed with clothing, and with just about everything that you can think of that you live with. And we but instead of thinking, so what had the government done to us? We think, oh, the government is taking
Hmm.
care of us. They give us these ration coupons so we can actually at least getting something.
Right.
So everything, it's, yeah, turned around and making you think that everything that you are receiving is actually something that the government is providing for you. So we all grew up and thinking, everything that we strive for, it's going to be eventually serving a great purpose, which is to becoming a member of the government, of the party, or something like that.
Mhm,
So we talk about, we no longer trust our parents. They're just there to provide food for us. We think of everything the teacher teaches us is absolute truth.
mhm,
And then we actually learned to hate anyone else other than Chinese, especially America was probably one of the top countries that we always brought up to think very negatively about,
mhm,
because you guys you ran it, you run a very very different social and economic system,
mhm.
and they always considered that American is the one that's kind of abusing the poor, and and the communist one is the one that provide for the poor, right?
I see.
So we were always brought up, very deep in our conscience, that we are always should be against Americans, against Japanese, and these are the people, these are the
Hmm.
countries that really provided a lot of freedom for their citizens to thrive. So we are so disencouraged to think that way. So we
Right.
always think of our whole country as an entity, and everybody is very much equal, and we're all being provided by this blanket of our
Mm,
party. Everybody is the same. even though we're poor, but we are at least very same, right? Nobody, nobody's ahead of anybody else. So, and then the kids were so limited with any future because there's only one testing. If you're trying to get to college, first of all, there's very few college that you can go to, but in order to get into a college, because that's really the only separate the kids now. If you think about it, we're same on everything else. We're all dumbed down, and then we're all, thinking one way. But academics is really the only thing that can separate a kid. So when you're considered to go to college, first of all, there's only one test that you can take. It's all and you have one chance to make, your score to be decided which college you go to. And then, so because of that, actually, I think there's a lot of bad virtues have developed because in order to achieve certain standard, kids became very, creative when it comes to, cheating and not being honest about their learning. But that was really the only thing that one chance in your life that you can get into, so to speak, a higher institution. So everything is so limited where I grew up. And I see that over here that they're taking away the standard test. They're taking away the
Right.
ability that, our kids used to have the freedom to explore and to kind of grow. And now they're very content with very little things that learning from school. And that's really dangerous because they don't learn the truth, and they don't learn. When I say they don't learn the truth, I meant that they are not taught with real history as much. That's also been filtered away from our school curriculums here. So that's one of the strong agenda that I'm running the campaign for. I feel like the school here is very much discouraging our kids from challenging themselves and coming through hardships and all that important virtues that they can practice as lifetime lessons has been taken away from them. Instead, they are being taught to use whatever format to express their learning. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with academics. And a lot of times they call it emotion learning. And all the basic fundamental things are stripped away. And that reminds me very much how I grew up. When they give you very limited ways to learn certain things, you become very ignorant about it. And I don't know if our audience are familiar with the Chinese characters. So when the Chinese government took over, the communists took over in 1949, they stripped away the traditional character, which means they put a very abstract basically they stopped your ability to learn the past history and culture because you no longer recognize the characters. So we all grew up with a new character, which is very much simplified. It lost a lot of the beauty and the the image fact of how Chinese character developed. But most importantly, we are very disengaged from our past history and culture and classic books. All these were banned and discouraged, and certainly not religion. Until this day, people are very discouraged from religion, especially if Christians or anyone who's even a Buddhist, you consider yourself superstitious. So people only have one thing left to be worshiping. It's themselves, their own self-egos and their self-interest. Everything else becomes irrelevant because they don't know the value about anything else. Certainly not other people or, the goodness in the character or family relationships. All those become so faded because we were never encouraged to explore and love it and to know the truth about it. So that's...
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to summarize, that's what the science that I see happening here and relating to what I have experienced in school.
Changing history is one thing, or not even teaching history, a negligence on history.
Teaching the wrong history, purposely the wrong history. From their angle, the angle they want you to understand history.
I heard you say, changing the language, right?
Yes.
in essence, they're changing the characters, and that's one of the things that we're doing where, we no longer have even the same idea of what words mean, or we change the language, or we have to be really like sensitive and walk on eggshells because we don't want to use the wrong language. So that peer pressure of changing the language. I also heard you say that there was a time where they taught the Chinese not to trust other nations that were more free than China, so that there was there's this kind of concept that's there, and that it was very limited resources that would come in. And so if you're listening to us today, I just want to point out these parallels are happening. In the 1990s, we went, or maybe early 80s, we went to social studies, where we stopped teaching real history of the United States. We went to more of that emotional social skills of a view of history, and that diluting of that, where we are ignorant of what past processes and history has for us. And you're seeing that play out again in this country that you moved to.
Absolutely. I mean, okay, when you mention those important history figures, I consider them historical giants that had
Hmm.
shaped Western civilization. And then if you think about, in the recent years when the movement was trying to destroy our founding father statues,
Hmm.
anything that holds significant pride of our country has been destroyed and encouraged to be taken down. That's exactly what happened in the Cultural Revolution in China. I remember even as a kid
Hmm.
that all these cultural significant places, we all familiar with Confucius. He's where people used to go worship, like Buddhism culture,
Hmm.
temples, and Confucius statues. All these people hold significance, cultural and historical significance,
Right.
has been destroyed purposely. So these red guards, so to speak, they're like the army during the Cultural Revolution. They did everything from destroying the history and cultural and library and books.
Hmm.
They take as a pride when they destroy those, and then they reveal, so to speak,
Hmm.
the wrong thinking of their parents. A lot of times the kids have to really reveal their parents for, if they ever had a classic book in their
Hmm.
house, and that's considered a betrayal of the party, because a movement is about drawing a line, getting rid of the old, because that's
Hmm.
really, really bad. Could give
Right.
people, good ideas or different ideas, and then destroy the people who have carried and or very knowledgeable about these histories. So this whole movement was so dramatic, and then we almost, think that what had we recently experienced in the United States is definitely carry on a lot of that signage as well, when we start to disengage kids from the true history, or
Hmm.
the pride of our country, and all these historical giants and facts and events that benefit us today. So they don't want the kids to know about that. Same thing in the Cultural Revolution. Many young people,
Hmm.
they were brainwashed, indoctrinated, and that there's nothing more important than the party and yourselves. And you can do anything that's with riots, or all these, everything opposite of the Chinese cultural virtues. The respect for the elders, respect for your teacher, all that had gone to the other extreme, and then
Wow.
they encouraged and awarded them for that. So
Hmm.
there was quite an extreme movement where all these treasures and people have been destroyed or
Right.
punished. Many of them died. Many people died during Cultural Revolution, and they were all these valuable people and cultural significance. So
So tearing down the symbols of a society or culture, tearing down those values. We look across our nation and we wonder, how did we get here? And it's really what I'm hearing you say. This has been tested before on different people groups, right? So
mhm,
this whole concept that you can't trust your parents, you got to trust the government, or you can't trust your parents, you got to trust your teacher, and the teacher and the party linked together. That's just blowing my mind away. By the way, I never
mhm,
made that connection. I knew that there was some educators that really push their political views, but there's a connection there. and then why this is playing out, because if we tear down the value of the individual, right, and I'm hearing you say that the value
Mhm.
of the individual, this is what you said, something very profound. There's very little room for us to express ourselves, right, with only this one test. And we're seeing that once again, where property ownership, where people can't, they feel no hope, and so what do they have? They only have the government left, if they don't have an outside worldview of that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so many aspects I can share with. We kind of started with the education, the kids, and the family, but there's so much more. Recently, I took my kids to go to Tibet because I'm a Tibetan Buddhist.
Hmm.
Uh, After I came to the United States, and then I want to share how that experience has really became crystallized for me why I'm running for the state legislature. And at the
Hmm.
time, it was during my race. So with all these experience, I kind of collected from my old childhood. At the time, it really made no impression on me as much. I just thought I came with my parents to the States and totally changed my lifestyle. But now I'm looking back, like I did all these comparison with you, but it's not until I went to Tibet I can tell you exactly how that was going to become our America's tomorrow if we don't change the path that we're traveling
Mm.
down. So in Tibet, it's kind of like the modern China that if I kept growing up in China and keep developing the same way, it would be exactly like Tibet. So Lhasa is Tibet's capital. So that's where the most we see the most tourists and all these temples and significances. But you can see that bigger than anything, it's a government entity that's been dominated by the communists. And you see big banners. We're talking about Hollywood-sized banners everywhere, not just in Lhasa, but all over Tibetan, glorifying the Communist Party. And all the kids, they have to be boarding school. They have to be in boarding school where the government, they provide. All the parents think this is great because the government provide their room and board, education, and they come back once a week to spend a little bit of time with their parents. But rest of the time, they were taught exactly, what I grew up with. And then
Mm.
they were being housed, right, and
Mhm.
closed by the government. And, they kind of become this alternate family for the kids. And then there's
Wait, wait,
the
pause there. Did you know that in the LGBTQ movement, that same language is used, that they're an alternate family or the replacement family?
Right, exactly.
Okay,
Thank
keep
you.
going.
That's exactly what I'm
Yeah,
thinking when I was looking at now the way that they're
right.
trying to alternate the kids out of their family to
Mhm.
what they considered someone they can depend on. And then all the my tour guide told me that he realized that he did not want to live in Tibet, but everybody's spend of even getting a passport because they really want to limit your way of exploring anything outside
Hmm.
your local area. And then all the city names has been changed. They keep on the same pronunciation, but they switched out the historical and cultural importance of the name, and they changed all the paintings in the temple. So the temple really is now just like a touristy place. Many
Okay.
things have been taken away. So I look at that and I think of what we're experiencing in the States. And my kids were with me and they see these things and they're like, this is so scary. But what is really common though in the Tibetan trip that we went is that people in Tibet, they never lost their fighting spirit. And that is
Hmm.
really what really inspires me to come back and work even harder and towards a goal that I can truly represent the people here. Because even though they have to be um, submission to what the government have told them to do in many ways, but they often say that we have a very strong spirit to survive, and they see a lot
Mhm.
of hope. They can't quite say that openly, but you can tell by
Hmm.
talking to them and sharing their past. they know what they want, and they grew up in this really physically harsh environment, right? But they're
Right.
equally mentally strong. So I'm just hoping that we have the same kind of spirit here, and then we cannot lose to this battle. We're definitely going to prevail in the future, because I do sense the same kind of spirit that we have here, the will to be free.
Man. Hey, excuse my ignorance, but unpack for me Tibet's government system. I just don't I just don't know. So it sounds like you said they have boarding school for the kids
Hmm.
that they've again taken down the markers of the Buddhist, would you say faith or faith? I don't know what the
Yeah,
proper
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
so
So one thing very significant about Tibetans. Okay, let me just run really quickly.
yeah.
They were independent nation, right,
Okay.
before the communists took over.
Okay.
So between the last dynasty in China until the communists took over, they were under the spiritual leader of Dalai Lama, right?
Okay.
So
Hmm.
when the Chinese took over, they really came after Tibet with weapons,
Okay.
like I guess those airplane weapons. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they really blew up a lot of Tibetan properties to try to take over Tibet, and then they have, and that's why when you go to Tibet today, everybody is very closely monitored, especially
Okay.
foreigners, right? So it's probably one of the most controlled area in China right now,
Wow.
because they're afraid of any rebellious
Hmm.
actions. So Tibet, you go in there, you sense a very strong sense of control everywhere. The Chinese flag is everywhere on the streetscape, everywhere on people's house. So it's just so suppressing when you're there. You
Right.
can't get
Right.
away from how obviously who is in control, right? So
Right.
so Xi Jinping's portrait was bigger than any of the Buddhist statue there, right in the
Hmm.
public square. Things like that. It just make you feel so suppressed, but at the same time, like I say, you can feel this strong urge of
Right.
survival instinct that
Right.
lives in the Tibetan people.
Okay.
And I trust that's everywhere in people who are ready to stand up to this kind of regime and
Hmm.
reclaim their freedom.
Now, was it always under the communist China's power, or when did they take over that? I mean, was that recently?
Uh,
I'm
oh, I'm
very ignorant
sorry.
of these things.
No,
I'm sorry.
no problem. It's really distant because they try to keep it distance, right,
Right.
for
Right.
people to
Right.
understand it. So communists took over China in 1949, and then they start to attack Tibet and try to claim them as part of China in the 1950s. And
Okay.
that's when they came heavily with armies, with weaponaries, with explosions
I
that
see. I see.
destroy. But Tibetan at the time, it's they Tibetans are one of the most religious group, right?
Okay.
Because people who live in Tibet, everybody has really strong faith, and that's
Hmm.
why they were led under the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader, and
Right.
everybody had guns. Okay, so
Right.
that's probably another reason that people should really understand the privilege we have under our constitution. These people had guns and they were
Hmm.
able to defend themselves, and so that after that, the government made sure that, or the Communist Party makes sure that nobody carries guns or weaponry. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
that's
think
when they
sometimes
started to
people think about our Second Amendment rights, and they're thinking, oh, for an intruder into my house, or whether really that constitutional was written so if the government turns on you, you can protect yourself from the government.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
Brian. That's exactly true. And until you understand some of the other countries and their history, and that would really help people to understand why we have guns and how wise our forefathers were. You
Hmm.
know, they had such wisdom in providing us what we need to make sure we're not being overtaken by the government.
How did you get from Beijing to the United States? What happened there? Like, did your
Oh, okay. Okay, this is another story I'd love to share with people. My parents came here first as private scholars, and
Mhm.
my father actually he had a very, he had a very reputable status as a heart surgeon. He
Okay.
actually worked for the high-ranking officials, but he had a foresight that China was not a place that he wanted to raise a family. So he tried really hard to become an immigrant here in the 80s.
Okay.
And then my mom came. But what I want to share with people is, how in the recent years we had like so many illegal immigrants coming into our nation, to
Hmm.
compare with how hard my dad and my mom, who are both very highly educated and very established professionals, they came here. They had a language barrier because they were all encouraged to learn Russian instead of English, right, when they were
Hmm.
in school. So they worked as janitors, they worked as
Hmm.
hotel maids, they
Hmm.
worked as anything that will earn them a living to prove themselves that they're an asset to this country. And that took at least 10 years before they started to reestablish themselves again, and kind of establish their professional jobs as well, to
So
make a
you said your
family
dad was a
here.
surgeon, and then he ended up
He
doing
was
these
a
other.
cardiologist surgeon. Yeah,
Wow.
he was actually he was awarded one of the 10 top youth professionals of his year.
Hmm.
But even then, he knew that he wanted to come to the United States and then
Right.
start from the very bottom to make a living, to prove his
Wow.
citizenship, and ultimately to earn his citizenship. He was so proud. He always tell
Hmm.
us, this America is the best place to live in because you can launch all your potentials. You have a freedom to speak your mind. Luckily, he was not as indoctrinated.
Right.
He always had a very strong mind, I guess. So we're so privileged and grateful because he made that move. But I just want to share like the hardship he went through as an
Right.
immigrant versus how now people understand how immigrants should be,
Yeah.
especially the illegal ones.
Yeah, exactly. And Lynn, if I could just address this for you know, obviously I'm a Christian pastor, so I want to address this really quick. Sometimes Christians say, well, we should show love and compassion. And then the Bible talks about the sojourner, right? But we need to understand in the Bible, when it talks about the sojourner, it says, as in Egypt. So, in other words, when the Pharaoh invited Israel down to live in Egypt, it was an invitation. It wasn't Israel's illegal immigration, and they were the sojourners in Egypt.
Absolutely.
They
Mhm.
legally migrated to Egypt because they were invited by Pharaoh. And so I think sometimes as Christians, we take that out of context where it says, love the sojourner, love the traveler, love this. But it's not through illegal immigration that we're to do that. Now we're supposed to love all people, of course, but the fact is, illegal means illegal. You didn't come here legally, and you should be escorted out. And then if there's an opportunity for you to come back, that's up to the government. But I think that's important.
Mhm.
So your parents legally migrated here. How old were you then?
I was only 14 when I came here. I was
Oh,
in
so
middle
you were through
school.
your informative years, and I mean, so you really remember that red what do they call them? Red regime, red
Yeah,
band,
the
brigade?
Cultural Revolution.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was born during that 10 years, so that lasts
right.
about 10 years. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I just love the example you give, Brian, about the Jews coming, because even then they had to prove themselves. They
that's
weren't
right.
just taking away the resources. They had to
Mm-mm.
prove themselves, just like my parents had to do.
Exactly
Um,
right.
and then imagine, with the status they had in China and coming here, starting from the bottom, they did not feel shamed. They feel privileged that they had a way to prove themselves and contribute to this nation. And so that gave them a pride, and instead of just being handed to or being
Hmm.
provided for, they had to work again in their lifetime to earn that respect and earn that living and provide for us. So I always gonna be grateful to my parents for doing that, and that just makes me feel even more privileged how I can become a citizen here,
Hmm.
and
Where did they
making.
settle first? Was it on the East Coast, or where was it?
Actually, my dad came and worked for the Mayo Clinic, so
Okay,
Minnesota first.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
You kind of say it like them too, Minnesota. So that's great.
Minnesota. Yeah, and that's where
Yeah, that's
we went to school, and
yeah.
then he moved to the East Coast. Actually, worked for Pfizer and Merck, and then he helped them develop the Far East market. And so, yeah, and then eventually he was able to go back to his profession, but
Mhm.
it just makes him feel more accomplished in a way, because he's able to be a contributor
Right.
versus.
Right.
Mhm. And he always tell us how prideful he was, just hold American passport, because that doesn't speak just a better living, but it speaks about so much higher higher levels of like virtues and values that a
Hmm.
person has. So he says that there's no way that you could actually do any of that in China freely. You're
Hmm.
always going to be taught what to do, and you're so limited. Just look at the billionaire in China once they start to take their bearing their foot on the ground, and once you say anything that's negative to the party, the next minute you're diminished. So
Hmm.
you really have no true potential anywhere in China that people think, that not without a huge price. A
Well,
lot of time is their lives.
well, what you just said there was so incredibly important, and if not brought out, I don't think people will catch it. But during the COVID time season, you might say, um, that was exactly right. If you said anything against the narrative that was supposed to be said, you were snuffed out. And
Mhm.
we're now seeing that a lot of those things are being, unturned. Like, hey, that wasn't true. The 6 foot didn't make any difference. All these things that people are coming to the conclusion of different outcomes, because there's something about freedom of speech that is incredibly valuable, where we are
Mhm.
able to grow and learn from each other and understand and challenge ideas and thoughts. And yet during that time, it was like, nope, you can't say anything about vaccines. Nope, you can't say anything about masks. No, you can't say, anything about ivermectin or other things. So I think that's incredibly important, that narrative control and censorship
Mhm.
is so important. So we've hit on the right to bear arms, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. We've talked about history. We've talked about those kind of we've talked about how educators became the primary parent to the people.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, the
What
family
else?
has switched.
Yeah, what else would
Oh,
you like to
there's so
share today?
much I can share with you,
Yeah.
Brian. I mean, when you just touched on um, the coronavirus, right?
Hmm.
So people could never imagine how suppressed the residents in China were during those years, because the
Hmm.
government was, they want to make sure that they have 100% control over people. So we're in Wuhan, it bursted out at
Hmm.
first. We were people here, the Chinese people who live in the States, then we paid really close attention on what any truth or facts that can leak throughout. So first of all, if people are not familiar, currently Chinese government always had what is called a Great Firewall.
Hmm.
That's why if you ever travel to China without certain software, you cannot leak out the firewall to see any other reports or
Hmm.
news other than what the Chinese government reports
I see.
inside China. So at the time we were all very eager to learn what is really happening in China. So many people were quarantined forcefully.
Hmm.
Many doors were locked from outside, and no food.
Hmm.
The people have no way to get food, right? Because they were
Right.
all being regulated for so long. Many people jumped from the high rises because they couldn't bear anymore. Many families were separated because certain people of the
Hmm.
families were believed to have contracted the virus, and they all had to live in the camp or the
Hmm.
hospitals they built. There's so much regulations, and we see so many sadness in videos that people send out to. I just wanted to share that during that time, it's another opportunity for people to see just how controlled China can be. If you pass to see how economically China has prospered, but now we
Hmm.
all know it's because they've taken advantage of many other nations who had
Right.
open arms to them. But if you pass all that, the core of Chinese Party, Communist Party, never changed and only got worse.
Right.
This coronavirus just put everybody, I think, again, doesn't matter how much money you made, there was no opportunity for people to try to survive if you are doomed to die.
Hmm. Lynn, like what's going through my mind is like you are so transparent about your upbringing and about your opinions, and yet we see on the news at times where people are kind of monitoring what Chinese or former Chinese people have said? Is there any concern in your heart for that, or like having this interview?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say I'm not afraid, and that's why I wanted to run for office because I
Hmm.
think these are the things that people really need to know. And
Hmm.
if and also because I have so much faith in this country.
Right.
I feel like I'm very protected in terms of my rights,
Right.
and if my remarks have any impact, if I ever go back to China visit or something, but I'm really not afraid because I do think that most people understand these are the things that will help, especially with current climate, the political climate of the people in this country, to step the right foot forward, right?
Hmm.
So for me, this is a small concern for me, and
Okay.
what I'm really concerned is even Chinese people in the States still don't see what's really going on, and
I
they
see.
still enamored by the Communist Party. That is a true concern to me.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah,
So
but yes.
if you were to talk to parents, like maybe for some of us, we've been raised in America all of our lives, we haven't seen the effects, would it be effects or effects, I never know, but of communism. What would you say to them? Like, if I was just I want everyone to love each other and get a hug, and we should all just embrace, and kind of, what would you say to that family, or that parent that is very
Mhm.
ignorant of these things?
I so appreciate that. First of all, I would say that again, that's another message I want to share with our community because that's so important that parents, you can never truly trust the school anymore. I would say that because in China, parents were forced that to basically hand their kids to the school. And I would say when we are in this country and with what's been happening the recent years, you need to always talk to your kids about everything, not just academics. You want to ask about their friends. You want to ask about what you're learning in school. That's not on the curriculum, especially these extra social ideology seminars that they now implement in public schools. Really ask them, what's really going on there, and if they hand out anything. And I homeschooled my third child, so
Hmm.
she is now back to the public school because I believe she's already very solid in her mind, and she
Hmm.
can tell the wrong and from the right, or the right from the wrong.
Hmm.
And so she's pretty much solid when it comes to critical thinking. And that's because I'm constantly talking to her. I talk to her about politics. I talk about how that influences our lives and the decisions our leaders make, and
Hmm.
that, how that impacts our lives and the things that we can engage and try to make a better policy.
Right.
So when I was running my campaign, she door knocked for me, and she talked to voters,
Right.
and give them her perspective. I really do think you can separate politics from our everyday life anymore, especially education. I would encourage that family really pay attention to not only the teachers that your child interact with, but the social workers
Right.
and their agenda. Because I tell you, I don't have it with me, but my daughter brought back a little booklet that they hand out in school, supposedly about mental health. But in there, they basically telling the kids, if you get in trouble from minor sexual relationship and you have consequences to deal with, you don't have to tell your parents. You can come
Mhm.
to us and we will help you. And Washington State has a law that passed 2 years ago, which we fought really, really hard on, which
Mhm.
parents have no rights to take away, to be informed, or to help our kids to make those decisions when it comes to transgender and abortion. And that's now become a law in Washington. So that's reiterated in that little booklet. So they
Mhm.
encourage kids to not come to the parents. So these are the things, if my daughter didn't bring back to me, I probably still thinking, the school is not to that extreme. So parents, please really pay attention, talk to your kids. Maybe it's not about how well you're doing in school, but just talk about anything in general, and tell them how much you love them. They can always come to you. They don't have to depend on other people. You should
Mhm.
really be the core that they could come to and ask questions. And then if something that's out of your ability to help, at any point, you and her together should build a team to explore the best possible outcomes. And then ask about the drugs, because that's really happening in school right now, the fentanyl. The kids want to fit in, and they were tricked. So talk about those, how dangerous that is. If the school's not doing that, I know they're not, parents really should come out and realize that the fentanyl is another evil thing that the Communist Party is doing to this world. Because it's a
Before
chemical.
we go on the drugs, you just hit something really important. You said that, so just like in the communist regime, they got it so that the kids went back to the teacher. So did the state of Washington form a law 2 years ago that says you don't need to talk to your parents. You go back to the teacher or the social worker or whoever in the school district. Am I making that connection? It's the
You
same.
are.
It's a communist
Absolutely.
practice, right? And
Yes,
then you talked
absolutely.
about critical thinking, and I mean, I never like it to come across patronizing, but I think we've lost that ability to like, what does that mean? Critical thinking. In other words, looking at whatever anyone says, whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever, and you look at it critically. What's the evidence say? What are the facts behind this? What are, and that critical teaching our kids not to read at face value. I remember one time, and this would have been years ago when my kids were in public school. My kids are grown for the most part. And we were reading through a book, and it was on evolution. It was all, and I just started asking questions. Like, what does that say? What are some other views about that? What, just, and I remember, this was probably 2010, the superintendent came over, school principal came over and said, hey, what are you doing? I'm just asking them questions. I'm thinking, I'm helping them to think critically through this, not just take at face value that everything that's written down is necessarily true. That's such a good skill that you're bringing up.
Absolutely right, Brian. And parents should know in current days, that's even harder to establish critical thinkings, because the people you trust and the entity and the programs you trust, they tell you the wrong thing. So you really have to even rise higher to look at the comprehensively what's happening around that issue, right? As it used to be, if you're provided with truth and facts, you can make that decision. And now I want to encourage parents to help your kids to even have to rise higher and surpass those agendas or those uh, propagandas, I guess, a lot of times, and the distorted news and truth, like what we experience in China. So there's only linear one way of thinking in that time, because everything else is blocked off.
Right.
So I would say, going back to that family, please help your kids. Just take one very simple example, something they're interested in, and help them explore all the facts from every source and help them make that decision, help them to make their decision, not we make that decision for them. So they know that they should be relying on more than just one sources, especially the one that they trust. You should really explore all the possibilities, and then eventually you probably develop another trust. But right now, the trusting sources are not credible.
And as a pastor, I've often taught families the different roles at different times. So 0 to 10, you're making a lot of the decisions for the kid, right? You're helping them, you're moving them forward, you're modeling decision making. 10 to 18, you're helping them. What you just said is think critically to help process through like how to make a decision. But they should, at 10, they're slowly making decisions. At 18, they're making most of the decisions, and you're helping them evaluate and think through that. And this is what I think one of the things that maybe I have missed over the time, but you just sparked in my head, is that we need to critically think about our emotions. I mean, think about if when we have an emotion, we need to think, is that true? Is that false? Is that, or we have a desire. Is that accurate? Is that good? Is that evil or bad? We have such in a culture where we're just saying, well, if I have the emotion, it must be true. If I have a desire, it must be true. No, we oftentimes at least in the Christian realm, we'll say, our emotions can get off and our desires can get off. And that's our sinful nature, you might say. And we need to take control of those things and say, what is true? I have the plumbing of a boy. I must be a boy. What is true? That, I have food, or I have this, or whatever it is, that life isn't necessarily greener on the other side of the fence, or the grass isn't necessarily green on the other side of the fence. And so I never really thought about critical thinking until you said that, Lynn. That is so powerful of what you just brought out there.
Yeah, and I think what you just shared is equally very, very influential right now. How the emotions driving our kids' decisions, right? It
Hmm.
used to be we want to respect your emotions, but that's because your emotions were well, like you say, well controlled and well understood, and it's within the proper rights. But
Hmm.
it's if your emotion it's about to harm other people, then it's not the right emotion to carry on, so you need to control that. So a lot of times our kids are being swayed and not be able to make that distinction, and that's where the parents should really come in and hold their hands. And through that process, emotion is not the number one thing that you should respect, but it's about how to respect other people and the values, of relationships and truth. So these are the things we have to put ahead of us, and really question the variety of emotions that are a lot of schools and programs are driving our kids towards. And that's really dangerous. And then they ultimately, a lot of times, make the wrong decisions.
That's exactly right.
Um,
You were going
so
down a path, and I cut you off about talking to your kids about addiction and drugs. And I want you to comment on that because was that also in China or not? I don't know. I mean, we're I know you're saying China. I mean, not you
just like
personally,
the
but go ahead.
it's just like the coronavirus.
Right.
When it first bursted, they control China right away, but they spread the germs to other
Hmm.
countries. Same thing with fentanyl. Kids
Hmm.
are absolutely banned from it. You can get death penalty if they found out you're a drug dealer, but that's everywhere in
Mm,
the Western country, everywhere in the world. So you see, that's just another true face of the Communist Party.
right.
They are really a disease that's spreading quickly right now. And I honestly think currently our government policies are doing the right thing, and really to reveal their egregious, the conducts from the Chinese government. So I would say, to answer your question, it's not an issue in China. It is a huge issue here, especially when the kids are driven by, they want to belong somewhere, they want to belong with their friends. But the fentanyls they're making are exporting from China, as you know, they're not natural products. So the dosage is really off, and it's so
Right.
harmful. And I know, in the recent years, some high school kids lost their life to
Hmm.
it. So that's something that I really hope that parents also be very alarming about, who they hang out with, and give them all the preventions that they could do, and understand the harm. Like my husband always tell our kids, never share drinks, and if you turn away from a drink that's been
Left. Yeah.
offered to you, yeah, you take a new drink.
Right.
So just because sometimes kids make mistakes, and you don't want, compromise your life
Right.
and health for that.
Well, and
So
that's so true. It's like teaching our kids how to be wise as serpent and innocent as doves, right? So it's like the idea is like, probably don't park in a dark alleyway at at midnight or something. Just being wise about what you do, and the
mhm.
same thing with the things that we attend. Now I want to. You ran for office, right? What position did you? Uh,
Oh, so I ran for the legislative district, the legislature position, house.
hmm.
We have two positions, so it's a first position. And so I was really hoping to make a difference in the policy making
Hmm.
aspect in our states. Um, but I had a great learning experience, and I got the opportunity to share a lot of things that people don't know about, all the facts about what's happening at the legislature, and how the policies are impacting us negatively now, and what are the things that I think we should change. It's really not hard. A lot of people ask me, if you become legislature, how are you going to, what are the things that you think we should pay tax on to benefit us? I said we should really think about the opposite. We should reduce our taxes, because right now we have so much waste,
Yeah.
that just another.
So when we and I know that you're not necessarily Christian in this, but I do want to say the biblical worldview, the role of government is very limited, right? Like it's the safety of the
Yes.
citizens and shared resources, right? So it's very, very limited. And some may even argue it's only the safety of the citizens. The shared resources is the churches or the faith community's responsibility. So when we look at that, when we start reducing all the programs that aren't really supposed to be there, right?
Mhm.
That these things that are to keep our citizens safe, it really is. We can tax way less, and we don't have to be like in the top. I think we're like the third most expensive state to live in, or something like that.
Yes.
It's absolutely crazy. What would you
Yeah.
say as you're unpacking this, as you're kind of reviewing our conversation today? What would you like people to walk away with?
Um, Gosh, there's so much. But I would think probably the most urgent reason for me to join the race to run for the office is because I saw what's happening in the family and in the schools. And many of the things we talked about today, like my experience with the Communist Party, we're so fortunate that we're not there yet at all.
Hmm.
But we're definitely towards that direction if we don't watch it. So I think the very basic social unit, which is our family, have to come first, and then have your children really feel like they can rely on you to tell you anything. So they're not 100% depending on the school and the social workers elsewhere, because you ultimately have the most caring for your children. And when I wanted to compare my childhood to our families currently, is that you always want to watch for those signs when your
Hmm.
children are starting to have they try to create a gap, or they have some emotional concerns between you and them. And this is such a time where you don't want to feel the pride as the parent that you're always right. This is a really critical time that you want to be at their level as a friend, as somebody that they can trust and relate everything that they have concerns to. Much more important than academics, I
Right.
would say. So I would say that would be the number one thing. Do everything you can help them establish critical thinking, because many times you want them to, start to establish that ability as they grow up and face issues on their own. But really, at this point, make sure you have that family tie, because until then, we can really build a successful society,
Hmm.
unless we have that family tie and trust. So I would say that's probably the number one and most important thing I think we all need to work on. And then I would say be more aware of the policies, because many times they don't tell you all the bad policy they pass every year. And
Hmm.
only when I start to run for office, I start to learn some of the policy that just blow my mind. Even though I've been very involved recently on some of the extreme policies, but there's so many bad ones out there. So
Yeah.
just be aware, and then make a decision, and see how you can get involved, and try to help the people to turn those around, right? Elect
Hmm.
good people to represent us, and get involved. And even if sometimes just to put pro and con on something that you believe is right, that
Hmm.
serves not only our community, but the family and yourself and you and your kids. So I would say those are the two things I really want people to walk away with. And I hope the best. I do see a light in our community. We
Hmm.
a lot of things being exposed now, and people are looking and thinking and thriving. So I have a lot of hope. I
That's
definitely wanted to be the fighter for our country, but I have a lot of hope in even Washington. We're
that's
going to
good.
turn this thing around.
Are you planning on running for office again, or what's your intent in the future?
Very possible, because I
Yeah.
had many support throughout my campaign, and not just because, not just from my own team, but from the community. People are so ready for a change, but there are also a lot of people, like I just shared earlier, they don't even know what's going on.
Hmm.
They're too busy. I totally understand, but we're at a critical time right now. We can't afford to be too exclusive,
Hmm.
too inclusive. I mean, you really have to look around, because every policy affects us, and many are affecting our children. We got to change the current for that.
Right, the
That's really
trajectory
important.
that we're yeah.
Hmm.
I've heard that if you run again, so let me just interview you as if you were running again. Okay, so you're for freedom of speech. You're for the Second Amendment. What other principles would you want to stand if you were running for office? Like what other
Oh,
things?
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I did have quite a platform, but I would say, yes, I would say I'm a constitutional conservative, and I believe I'm not far right. I certainly think there's a lot of wisdom in our Constitution, and and it goes all the way back to the Old Testament, right? I
Mhm,
became actually more informed now about Christianity because I think a lot of the principles in our Constitution is from way back then, where
mhm,
people were driven by morals, by values, by
mhm,
virtues. So I would say everything that Constitution provide for us. But recently, I just want to also address all the problems that we have been facing, whether people notice that or not. Something very practical like public safety,
yeah.
the quality of education, and then just all these wrong sociologies, social ideologies that's been
Mhm,
distracting from our kids. Those need to go away. All those policies needs to be more parent driven and family driven, and return back our parental rights. I would say parental rights, public safety, and then the freedom of thinking, freedom of
yeah,
speech.
yeah.
And so that is so important.
It's funny that we
There,
even have to say that, isn't it? Like freedom to
I
think.
know
I
now
mean, it's
we
like
really have to emphasize that. I can't believe that, it comes down to that, because gosh, I never thought in the States that we were censored the way we were,
mhm.
since the COVID. So that has to be restored.
Yeah, absolutely. Lynn, it's been a pleasure to have you on. You've brought out so much. One of the other things I didn't bring up, but I guess I didn't realize, May 14th, 1948 was when Israel was reestablished as a nation. And then you said 1949 and 1950, this happened in,
Mhm.
in China. It seemed like right in that little time in history, a lot of these things took place. I find that to be very interesting. I don't know that I have an outcome statement from that, but just very interesting as far as like, wow, something was happening around that time. But then how you brought in the party was really dictating or directing the education. And that is incredibly interesting to me because when we look at the state of Washington, many of the things that are directing our educators are not necessarily laws, but regulations that the administrative state are making up. And
Mhm.
some of it is laws, but some of it isn't. And so I look at these things, and I just want to say to all educators out there, if you have a moral compass and you stand for truth, it's time that our educators stand up and say enough is enough, and really, not take the one party line. I think when we listen to these things, we oftentimes think of things as being political, but really the family is not political. It's a unit. It's just a
Mhm.
fact, right?
Mhm.
Uh, there's a lot of other examples I can give. Critical thinking is not political. It is what we should be doing as individuals. And
Mhm.
so, anyway, I so enjoyed my time with you today, Lynn, and
Oh, thank you.
you're welcome to
Thank you
come back
so much
anytime.
for having me. I always so appreciate the fact that I can share these things with people, because I believe that's going to make us stronger when people are revealed to the truth. And then just to follow up what you said about the 1940s, I think because the World War II brought a lot of sympathy to
Hmm.
the world, and then we want to help other nation, and so we allowed a lot of freedom of forming. China was probably one of those examples,
Hmm.
and they've been carried by other nations who thought, we want the whole world to be a nice community. And I think I they I would say the Communist Party, they took that opportunity and then totally then start to take advantage of others to prosper themselves. And it's not for the people, it's just for the
Hmm.
government elite. So anyway, so I do think that they took advantage of the sympathy that they received, and unfortunately they had a compromise, not only their people but the whole world right now. So that is definitely a direction that is going, and we should be really really aware of. But otherwise, I truly appreciate the fact that I can share with people, and then the signs that we see now versus what I lived and experienced. So I hope that, we have made some really good connections, and I hope in the future, if I ever had a chance to talk to you guys again, I would love to have that opportunity, especially if I'm going to run for office again.
Amen. Amen. Well, Lynn, it's been a pleasure to have you on our show today. And thank you for bringing to light these parallels between what we're currently experiencing and what is happening at the local level, at the school board level. And if you're here and you're thinking, how do I make a difference? One, pray for your electeds, pray for those school board members, get involved. I mean, start having dinner with your kids, right? Sit down and just have dinner and see what's going on throughout their week. Help them to learn how to think critically, and I think it's important. We don't want them to be critical people. We want them to think critically through things, right? There's a difference. And then finally, let your voice be heard, whether that be on legislation, whether that be on, something that's happening in your community. Let your voice be heard and communicate on those things. It's important that we all stand together and
Yes.
respect differences, because we have them, but yet we value each other as fellow human beings. So any closing remarks, and then we'll go to our final little video that as we go out today.
Oh, well, I think everything you just mentioned is so well said. So well said. And when we come together, we'll make a difference. And every single thing that I shared today, I hope it resonates with you, and as somehow that you make your family closer, make a better future for your children, and definitely the right direction for our country.
Amen. Well, the Lord bless you all as you take a stand in the public square. And Lynn, thank you for being on today.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
You love our beautiful state, but does fighting for issues that most affect families ever feel like you're climbing alone? It can feel like an uphill climb in a hostile environment that champions causes detrimental to Washington families. Again and again, the summit feels out of reach, but you don't have to climb alone. With like-minded people fighting for Washington families by your side, the journey becomes not just possible, but powerful. The Defender app, brought to you by the Family Policy Institute of Washington, connects you with your team for the climb ahead. Connect with conservatives who care about issues affecting families in your specific county and across our state in order to make our voices be heard locally and in Olympia. Simply click Learn to stay informed about the latest news affecting families. With one click, press Huddle to team up with other conservative minds in your specific county who care about how these issues affect you in your unique community. Then simply press Activate to get involved and to make your voice heard on legislation that matters in Olympia. With the Washington Defender app, you won't face the fight alone. Together, we can make a difference for families in Washington. Download the Washington Defender app today, a simple way to let your voice be heard.